Plan R is for review. Let's talk about F1, the movie.
Hello everyone, welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Today we're here to discuss F1. But before we get into that, Daniel, do you want to give the people a movie recommendation for the week?
So the best thing I watched last week was The Last Emperor. I'd seen this movie before a few times, but not in a long time. It's a 1987 biographical epic about the life of the last emperor of China. So it starts in 1908 or so, where Puyi is crowned emperor of China at age 2, and things go downhill from there for him. So the movie essentially follows his life as he grows up in the Forbidden City and how he, as the emperor of China, experiences Chinese history for the next 50 years. So he experiences the fall of the imperial system, the military coups, the warlord era, the Republic, the communist takeover, the invasion of Japan, like everything that happened in Chinese history between the 1910s and 1960s, he kind of experienced and is kind of reflected in his life. Like he becomes a Japanese puppet at one point, and he has like an English mentor who influences him and kind of shapes his view of the world. And it very much follows like the broad strokes of the lives of this person who was kind of at the center of Chinese history for half a century. And he kind of ended up a gardener in a communist country, kind of sweeping the streets of the city that he used to own as an emperor, essentially. I think it won something like 8 Oscars or something like that. It's a very celebrated movie. I think it does hold up as a historical epic. What it doesn't do so well is actually tell the story of Puyi's life, because if you actually read up on that, it's much more complex. It's much more fascinating. It's much darker than the movie portrays it, but it kind of gets the highlights right. But what it actually shows is the ups and downs, mostly downs, of Chinese history in the first half of the 20th century, and how, like, all the changes that it went through, and all the different revolutions and wars and takeovers and struggles and reforms, and how society completely changed several times over the course of a lifetime. I think it does a good job portraying that. It's got some hokey acting in it. There's a bunch of Chinese actors whose English is not amazing, and that kind of drags down the feel of the movie a little bit. A lot of the shot, like the cinematography, is a little bit basic, but like this was shot in the 80s as China was just beginning to open up after having closed its doors to the world for decades. And this was one of the first movies that was actually shot on location in these places and had a lot of access and a lot of resources to kind of make this part of history come to life. And it's a really interesting watch. It's not the be all and end all if you want to learn about Chinese history, but it's quite good as a movie, as a drama, as a personal journey of this person who was born into this impossible situation and kept being the plaything of history in some ways. It's the kind of movie that does not get made very often anymore. It seems like that kind of the attitude that went into making this history come to life is not really something that's done very often these days. And so it kind of feels like out of a different world when you watch it a little bit. So for that reason, I recommend it.
No, I mean, it definitely sounds very interesting. And as someone that doesn't read up too much on history, I do like historical pieces. I do like historical movies and stuff. So definitely one that I'll add to my list. Quick question. Is it a Chinese production or Hollywood production?
It's an Italian director, and I'm not sure who produced it, but it's basically a Western production that essentially got permission and access from the Chinese government in the 80s. A lot of people seem to kind of write it off as like a propaganda piece or something like that. Basically, like if this was allowed to be made, surely it has to portray the communist regime in a positive light. And it doesn't really. I think it's pretty nuanced about it. Much of it is spent in a prison camp where Puyi is being reformed into being a good communist. You know, it's kind of makes everybody look bad, right? The imperial system is cruel and arbitrary and decadent. The Republican era was dysfunctional and corrupt and brutal. The Japanese were not very nice either. And then when the communists come around, the movie actually kind of makes a point that not much has changed. Like there are scenes that kind of parallel earlier scenes. Like if you were to make like communist propaganda, you would do it completely differently. I think this movie is decently honest, but it kind of puts a lot of punches. Like when you read up on what things were actually like, it's like it does not really show or the true horrors of that history, it kind of skirts around them a little bit.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for that. I don't have a best thing watched this week, though I did check out the first 3 episodes of Ironheart. Don't ask why. I should really be more like Daniel and not really care about what Marvel does with its TV series, but I'm what they call a Marvel shill. Whatever they do, I will at least check out and see what's going on there. My thing is, I'm just kind of like frustrated with some of the TV shows that Marvel puts out, and I know this was part of the last regime where it was do as much as you can, as fast as you can, so we can try to make as much money as we can. And I know that mandate has changed, and maybe the future TV shows that they put out will be a little bit different to this. But a lot of my issues that I have with this is that they just don't take the TV shows seriously. It doesn't take its character seriously. It doesn't take any of its antagonists seriously. It doesn't really take the story that seriously. I don't know whether it's trying to capture a new audience or trying to, appease to a wider set of people. But I really feel like I know comic book movies generate so much money and bring home, well, they used to anyways back in its heyday, bring in billions of dollars for a lot of the movies that it was putting out. But I do feel like these shows kind of lose who the core audience is in these shows, and they don't really tell stories that resonate with the majority of people that are really like watching these TV shows. A lot of the time you're kind of questioning what's the point of the show, like why is this made? Like, what is it doing to enrich the universe that's already out there? Is the character doing anything of interest? Are you even telling an interesting story within the character itself? Like, what's the message? What's the purpose? And I feel like a lot of that is lacking, which is a shame. And again, I always go into these things wanting to like it. I don't, tune into any of these shows, wanting to hate it, wanting to dislike it. And I definitely don't feel like it's the worst thing they've done. I probably like this a little bit more than I liked Hawkeye, because again, Hawkeye was just more of the same, like of, why they're doing this. You're not really trying. You're not taking what you're putting out seriously. With these TV shows, because they do feel somewhat disconnected, or they're not completely disconnected, but they don't have as significant impact into the mainline movies in the MCU. I feel like this is where you can be a little bit more adventurous in the story that you're trying to tell, be a little bit more creative in what you're trying to do, and just like kind of take a little bit more risks and do something that's different to what the formula is for the movies. I just feel like we don't get that. I feel like we get more of the same characters. There just isn't anything really unique about it, is all I'm trying to say. And again, it's a shame because, people love TV series, people love to binge TV series. There's a lot of, good examples that they can pull from, whether it's comic book, TV shows, or not. You have things like Smallville, which I loved. You have like early seasons of like things like The Flash or, Arrow and things like that, which you can kind of pull from where this TV show is doing well. And you've got the big example of something like The Penguin, which is a TV show in the Matt Reeves DC universe, where they wanted to continue from the movie and they actually took the property seriously. They actually took the story they wanted to tell seriously. They took the character seriously, and what you get is a very, very good TV show out of it. And I just feel like now that we're past this mandate of do everything as fast as possible, as much as possible, I'm curious to see how they kind of reposition the TV shows, how they start to kind of rethink how they handle the TV shows. But I think this one is more of the same slop that we've been getting from not even just Marvel, from Star Wars in general, and from kind of Disney and their TV shows. And hopefully with the new mandate, they're a little bit more serious and we get better quality. But I feel like this is just frustrating to watch, because again, like, I'm predisposed to this type of stuff. Like, if I have a choice of new TV series that have just come out in that week, I'm more likely going to lean towards the comic book one, because again, that's where like my interests are, and I'll give that more of a chance than I would putting on something random. And I feel like that faith isn't being repaid at the moment. So
Yeah, it seems like a blast from the past, because I think this has been in development for 5 years. I very carefully dipped my toe into the discourse surrounding it. I was reminded of like Book of Boba Fett and Season 2 of Mandalorian and all that stuff that honestly I've kind of left behind now. Like this entire discourse of nerd outrage. And it feels like the world has kind of moved on. And then Ironheart comes out and everybody gets pulled back into like 2018. That's kind of my impression. And what I've heard from it is just not great. in terms of like how the story is constructed and what it's about and the character. And like, I don't think there's anything wrong with the premise, but it just sounds like a train wreck from start to finish. And there's a reason why it's been kept on the shelf for so many years, and nobody wanted to release it. I guess they had to release it at some point, so they might as well do it now. I don't know, but like it just seems like a time capsule.
I mean, those debates are definitely not dead. I know you don't spend too much time on Twitter/X, but those debates rage on all the time. It's really stupid. You have, the people that love Zack Snyder and his Superman trying to trash on anything the new Superman movie does. And again, you have like all the discourse around anytime there's like a female character in one of these comic book movies and stuff. And it's very tiring. I just kind of want them to put out good quality products, good quality stories, and for me to enjoy it. All of that noise, I try to like skip past it. It always seems to find its way on my timeline. It's really boring. No one cares for it. Just like, if you're gonna critique something, at least come with some valid points as to, you didn't like the story, you didn't like this, you didn't like that, as opposed to going in there with your predetermined bias because you liked Zack Snyder's Superman, for example. You're going to hate the way that James Gunn portrays Superman, even though it's a completely different universe, completely different settings, and they're going through completely different things. And you can like both. Like, people out there, you can like both. I liked Man of Steel. I think it's a a really good comic book movie, and I'll check out James Gunn's Superman and I'll see what that's saying, and hopefully like that as well. But yeah, the conversations around these stuff, super boring. I'm not into it.
Yeah, I'm in the camp where I think Snyder Superman was hot garbage, and I want this to be a do-over. So, in about 2 weeks we'll find out whether that's happened or not. To bring this back to Ironheart, it's just a weird one where I kind of grew out of it years ago, but the rest of the world apparently hasn't. Like, this entire discourse and this entire outrage and dissecting it and putting out all this discourse, either farming outrage on the one end or chastising the world for not liking a mediocre story, because the only reason you could not like it is because you don't like the identity of the protagonist. I thought in 2025 we kind of had gone beyond that and can, I don't, you know what I mean, like, but apparently not. I'm so annoyed and disappointed in everybody that I can't even form a coherent sentence. It's like, it's so boring.
If anything, it's got completely worse, and not just related to movies, but everything on the internet. It's just so much worse. But we'll kind of tie that up, and we'll sort of move on.
Please.
Main event time. Formula One, the movie. Daniel, do you want to give the people a synopsis before we get into our discussion?
So, Formula One is a sports drama that follows the story of Sonny Hayes, who in his early days was kind of a Formula One prodigy, kind of washed out of the sport and has been kind of winning random races for the last 30 years. But he's never won a Formula One race. And he then gets approached by an old friend who is now the owner of a failing Formula One team. And he essentially asks him to join the team and lead this team to success. He then encounters a whole bunch of other characters who are on their team, including Joshua, who is a young British racer who is basically the next generation of racing. And the two kind of have to work together, but they hate each other's guts, and they kind of approach the sport from completely different perspectives. And they all have to learn to work together in order to kind of salvage this failing team and win the championship. So what did we think of F1, the movie?
Well, this was the most generic, by the numbers, run-of-the-mill story that you're ever going to get. And I flipping loved it. Like, this was absolutely thrilling. Honestly, I had smiles on my face so many times throughout the movie because I was just having so much fun with this movie. And by Daniel's face, I think we might have a disagreement in it. I don't know, but I had so much adrenaline throughout the whole movie. All of the races, really made you feel like you were in the cockpit or whatever it's called with the driver. I loved all the character, dynamics and the character dramas in this. Again, all of it is by the books. All of it is, what you'd expect. The rivalry between the two drivers, the love interests. It's all what you'd expect. The rivalry between the drivers, the love interests, the, owner that's desperate to try and get that one victory, etc. It's all by the numbers, but it all works really well. I feel like the cast really do a good job on sort of selling you and bringing you into this world, and you really feel for the characters, and I feel like that's one thing the movie does really well. It makes you care about the characters, and it adds the right level of depth for each of the characters. So, someone like Joshua, you kind of understand his story and his motivation. The owner, you understand his story and his motivation. Brad Pitt's character, you understand his story, his motivations. Like, everyone's clearly defined, and it's not super deep. It's not super sort of intricate, but it's just stuff that you can bring some type of emotion out of you. Yeah, it was just thrilling. Like, genuinely, it was just like a very good summer blockbuster movie. It's kind of what I ask from these type of movies, where you're not going to do anything super deep. You're not going to do anything that's going to push cinema forward, or like whatever. You're not trying to make a masterpiece. You're just trying to make a good summer movie, and it executes it really well, even though it's by the book. But yeah, that's my thoughts, Daniel. Over to you.
So I cannot stand sports. The only thing that's worse than watching Formula One for me is watching football. And I actually had a scare a few weeks ago when I thought there was a World Cup on. But then, Hervé, you explained to me that what is it, the World Club?
It's
What's
the
what's
Club
happening
World
right now?
Cup. Well, they
Yeah,
invented a Club World Cup, basically, yeah.
right. For a second, I thought it was a World Cup, and I had a scare about, do I have to sit through this again? Has it already been 4 years? And then you kind of talked me off the ledge. No, actually, it's not that. It's not going to be the full thing. So I hate sports. Watching it, the discourse around it, sports fandom. I cannot stand it. It bores me to tears. It makes me look for the next window to jump out of. I cannot stand it. For that reason, I was kind of not looking forward for this movie. But the irony is, I'm kind of okay with sports movies because sports movies are kind of underdog heroes' journeys kind of things. Most of them follow a very simple template that is like it's basically Star Wars, right? Like underdogs against the overwhelming enemy. There's a big tournament or a big match or something that they have to win, and they have to be creative, and they cannot win in a fair fight. Like, it is a very much heroic fiction, right? And so I can latch onto it from that angle. But the actual sports itself is not something I care about in the slightest. And so I was not looking forward to F1. I was desperately looking for anything else to watch this week, but you guys kind of talked me into it. Surprisingly, I kind of enjoyed the first half. I think the characters really save it. They have a lot of charm, even as cardboard cut out as many of them are. The characters are really what makes this come alive. I liked Sonny, I liked Kate, I liked Joshua. So there's like all these different characters who are very archetypical. It's not a lot to them, but they have charm. The entire production is exciting and fun. I understand that nothing about this is authentic. Like, this is not how Formula One works, according to what I've read. Like, even in the most basic way, it felt engaging for some reason. As the movie progressed, I was looking for a story to happen, and I found like 6 of them, and none of them really amounted to very much. And I think that is really the big problem with this movie. Like, I look for story, I look for character, I look for big character moments, character arcs, the big decisive moment where somebody has a choice to make. All of these things, that's my kind of story. I was looking for that here, didn't get it. They kind of just win in the end. And that was grossly underwhelming and not engaging. This movie is 2.5 hours long, which is about an hour too much. And I think if they had just cut out a whole bunch of stuff and just focused on 2 or 3 stories that kind of are woven together into a decent narrative, I think this could have been much better. But I think it's too scattered, there's too much in it, and it ends up not being character focused enough. And simply watching somebody win a race because the script says so is not engaging to me. Let's talk about it.
Hard disagree. Hard disagree. Firstly, on the runtime, because I was having so much fun in this movie. So when I first heard it was 2.5 hours, I was a bit like, okay. And I heard, people say that it might be, 20 minutes or so too long. But because I was so invested in the story and in the characters and in this world, I loved every second of it. And I was actually, normally I check my watch to see how long I have left because I'm trying to get out of the cinema. This one, I was like, I didn't want it to end. I was wanting more of it. I was wanting more of the team. I was wanting more of the characters. So that I get it from your perspective, but for me, my experience, I was having so much fun with the movie. I didn't want it to end. On what you said about the stories and how there was like kind of like 6 different stories, and they didn't really wrap any of them up well. What do you mean by that? And what are the different stories you felt like it was trying to tell, and why didn't it have good conclusions for you?
So let's count them. right? So we have Sonny's story, which is about the washed up veteran who has to come back to join a failing team to win the big match, right? It's very archetypical. I've seen a dozen movies like this. Like, even as somebody who avoids sports, like, my favorite sports movie is probably Pacific Rim, because it has the structure of a sports movie. And it's basically the same story, including the veteran learning to let the rookie win. Also happens in Pacific Rim, but that's another story. There's just so much stuff in this and so many details, but I didn't feel like it kind of amounted to like a story with a beginning, middle, and end for him. So he has to learn to kind of work together with others, right? But then he kind of ends up just winning by himself. He kind of runs the team by the end, right? Is this kind of just my impression?
Yeah, it does feel like he's calling most of the shots, or he's kind of ignoring, what everyone else is suggesting. But I do feel like there was a moment where he kind of understands that even though what he's suggesting is working, and he has a good knowledge of it, but at the same time, he still has to be part of the team. He still has to work with everyone around him to achieve the win that they end up getting.
But does he have like a big victory moment in the end where he makes some kind of decision or overcomes some flaw or something like that that allows him to win?
Probably not. I'm trying to remember it.
So the kind of thing you would expect maybe is that he thinks he knows better, and he's probably right. He's probably the most experienced and capable person on this team. He does not need anybody's help really, or at least initially. And then at some point he reaches like his lowest point, at which he kind of realizes he needs somebody else, and he makes some big decision to change, and that is then what allows him to win, right? That's how that would go. And like another version of this is when he realizes that he needs to enable Joshua to win. But that also doesn't really happen, right? Like, he's like, Joshua does not, in fact, in the end win, right? I don't know. It just felt like there was something missing here where he was kind of drifting from one moment to the next, but there wasn't really a progression, and like there wasn't really an end to the story for Sonny, I thought. And they kept seeding stuff, right? Like the thing about, not working well with others and being a bit old school and not really understanding how the business works anymore, and kind of not having the respect of other people because he washed out of the sport in such a spectacular fashion 30 years ago. None of it, I thought, really quite went anywhere in a really satisfying fashion.
If anything, a lot of what he was doing was actually feeding Josh's story over anything, because like you said, the thing about the crash that he had all those years back, those were some of the stuff that Josh was watching to try and understand his character a little bit more and try to get into like his psyche as to like why he is the way he is, and stuff like that. Even the whole kind of rejecting some of the new school ways of doing things, where it's like handling the media, or going out for just like a run on the outside and not having to being hooked up to all of these machines and stuff, and just like things like showing up on time, and the repetitiveness of going over the track over and over again to try and find that little half a second that will help them win the race. It was like all of that was kind of feeding into Josh in the way that his character changed and his character developed, and his friction with someone coming in and being completely different to what he's used to.
Joshua's story is kind of the next one on the list, right? Because like I actually really liked the dynamic between those two, right? Especially like Sonny kind of being the best, but being a little bit out of the loop, and Joshua having a lot of potential, but not really having the discipline to really realize it, and kind of being focused on the wrong things, like focusing too much on the social media stuff and on the promotions and on his image, as opposed to just grinding out the wins, right? And throughout the movie, I kept thinking, like, surely they will come together at some point, right? They will kind of realize that they have to have stuff to learn from each other, and that the way they win is to kind of become more like each other, but kind of meet in the middle, where Sonny has to do Joshua things and Joshua has to do Sonny things, and that is how they become the best driver. That's kind of thing I was expecting. And there's certain things in here, like there's a scene where Joshua recovers from his accident, and he has all this high-tech stuff, right? Like all of I don't even know what half of it is, right? But like he has all this equipment and these sensors, and it's a very high-tech, very optimized kind of training regime. And Sonny just goes running, and he kind of plays with tennis balls, right? And that is his training essentially. And at one point, Joshua kind of tries there's this machine. Maybe you can tell me what it's called, where you kind of have to, like, it tests your reactions, right? Where there's like 6 different places and you're supposed to punch the one that lights up and it measures your reaction time, right? Something like that, right? He used to have really good scores, and then after his accident, his scores are terrible and he's frustrated by it. And then he kind of sees kind of the tennis balls that Sonny uses to train his reflexes and his hand-eye coordination, and he starts doing that. And that is when he starts to get better. And also the thing about running the track before the race. That is a Sonny thing. And when Sonny is out of the team, Joshua starts doing it with the entire crew, right? So there are certainly moments there where that is happening, right? And I think there were moments where Sonny started learning things from Joshua as well, right? I think Sonny initially doesn't really use the simulator, right? Am I right? And then as things kind of heat up, he starts using it more because he becomes to appreciate that all of these technical improvements that have happened since he left the sport actually are good, right? They actually have value. And so he starts using them more. And then Joshua watches him and says, hey, give me the same settings that he has so that I can train like him. And like, there are like individual scenes here where I think this is going in that direction, but I felt like it never came together. I felt like there was never like a culmination of it.
But didn't Joshua, or didn't Sonny win because Joshua adopted some of his tactics in the way that he stopped Lewis Hamilton from going into first place, and that essentially cleared up the path? And I can't remember how they crashed, but their cars kind of came together and they both ran off the track. And then that just allowed Sonny to go ahead and finish the race in first place. So it almost felt like that was, I mean, for Joshua anyway, the culmination of this is everything that he's learned from being around this guy, and this is what he's going to do to make sure that he wins and they get that first spot.
Is that what happened? That he basically started driving like Sonny?
I mean, the idea for the final race was for Josh to win, and Sonny was still guiding it, especially when they got to the final 3 and they're both ahead, and he was giving them the advice of how to stay ahead and how to sort of use the slipstream and stuff like that. But I think it got to a point where Joshua realized that he couldn't win, and if he couldn't win, then he would have to adopt what Sonny did to then, knock him and Lewis Hamilton out of the race to then clear the path for Sonny to go ahead. So it is, in essence, something that he picked up from Sonny. He did actually say as well, he's like, oh, I thought I'd give you this one because it was your last chance to win a race, essentially, and I'll have plenty more opportunities to win races in Formula One.
Yeah, no, I absolutely see that it's that there is something there. It just didn't feel like it came together. Maybe because I'm not a Formula One guy, I didn't really pick up on that. Like, I did realize, obviously, that that Joshua had used this maneuver and that he was driving more aggressive than he did in the past. It just didn't feel like that was it. Like, it didn't feel like that was enough for that to be the point of the story. And I felt like if that was the culmination, because we just spent 2 hours where these two were basically butting heads and basically telling each other that they are what's wrong with the sport and all of that, I felt like I needed something more overt and something more explicit to really show kind of them coming together. Whereas it felt to me like it kind of happened.
To me, it seemed over, especially having followed Josh's journey throughout the movie. And I think a really pivotal part for him in the movie was the moment where he admitted to his mother that it was his fault that he had the crash. It was his fault because he didn't listen to Sonny. And again, you can imagine a world in which everyone's kind of giving his praise and everything that's wrong is not his fault. He's blaming this person, blaming that person for everything that's going wrong. And you saw it with, the woman that was changing the tire, and you saw it when he was like blaming Sonny for certain things, that he's kind of deflecting everything. And you can kind of see it with his manager as well about his image and like the lifestyle that he's living and stuff like that. And then for his character to finally admit to his mother of all people that I was the reason this happened because I wasn't listening to Sonny, was like that real character growth. And that kind of showed that he should have been listening to Sonny, and that like there was actually truth to what Sonny was saying, and that maybe someone does know better than him and maybe he needs to be a little bit more humble in his approach. And then that then feeds into what happens in the final race, because with them going out for a run on the track with wearing the odd pair of socks like Sonny did, it was just like him almost embracing Sonny. For me anyways, it was him embracing Sonny, embracing his ideas and his methods and his way of doing things. And I can't remember whether he could actually go ahead and win or not in that particular scene, but essentially he causes the collision between him and Lewis Hamilton, so that Sonny can then have his crowning moment. It, like, to me, there was like the pieces that led up to it, and that it made sense for me as to like why it happened, how it happened, and why it was satisfying. You know, the way that his story concluded, especially from where we see him at the start, where it's all about the image, all about the show, all about his PR. Even that moment where they kind of come head to head, and you know, I think they just placed in top 10, or no, they both had, sorry, they both did not finishes, or whatever they call it in Formula One, but he's still posing for the press. He's still, sort of, after the little conversation they have, still posing for the media. It just kind of showed a real character growth for him. Anyway, well, that's how I took it anyways.
I can absolutely see the pieces. I just felt a little bit unsatisfied. But I see what you're saying. I just felt like there was like a final step missing. Part of it is also that there's so much other stuff going on, right? So for instance, the combat design, right? Like this whole thing about, like, apparently nobody has ever thought of accounting for turbulence in the Formula One design. And they kind of just, like, Sony kind of wanders into kind of the lab and kind of says, hey, what about, like, we try to account for turbulence. I still have like traumatic flashbacks from my fluid mechanics class in university. I know that this math is really hard and it's really difficult to account for. And there's a reason why they normally don't, assuming that what the movie said about this is true. But I absolutely buy that this is really difficult to do, and there's a good reason to not try. But I felt like this, like, has nobody thought of this before? Like, nobody has ever tried what Sunny suggests to try, especially this kind of this rocket, like literal rocket scientist who is supposed to be this crack genius at this stuff, has never thought of this. And then they update the design, right, to account for this approach, and then it doesn't seem to matter. It doesn't seem to be what actually wins. Or like maybe it feeds into this final thing where they are able to drive the way they drive because they have this design or whatever. Like, but I felt like there was so much time spent on this innovative design, like they're thinking outside the box and they are like trying things that nobody has ever tried, and then ultimately they just drive normal. I don't know. Like, am I too much of a Philistine who doesn't know Formula One to have not picked up on this? Like, if you know Formula One, was there more there?
Yeah, I'm definitely not a Formula One person, so I'm not the person to answer that question. What I do feel like it did was it helped, you know, the whole narrative of it wasn't just one person's win, it was the team's win. I feel like it contributed to that. But where I feel like it could have been better was if it was her idea as to, you know, creating the new tech for the car. And I say that because, you know, Sonny kind of walked in and was very dismissive of the way that everyone was doing things, didn't listen to anyone, did things his own way, was clearly, you know, not following any of the, you know, team plans that had been laid out, and was, you know, always going for plan C, which is, you know, chaos and whatever. But it would have been really good for her to have maybe learned off of him and adapted to him and been like, okay, fine, if he's going to approach it this way, why don't I help with that for the greater good of the team? Why don't I help come up with a design that's going to help him in these particular situations where I see that, again, okay, you're doing well in this situation, but in the turns you want to be a little more aggressive or whatever. But the reason why I understand it coming from Sonny in the movie was because he's had the experience of racing in all the other, you know, different types of racing fields or different types of racing types. I don't know what the name officially of it is, but he had a lot of races where it's a little bit more aggressive, especially the first race that we see him in at the start of the movie, where it's a lot more aggressive, where he's kind of being a little bit more forceful, running a few cars off the road, etc. So he actually is coming into it with a little bit more experience than just F1 and what he's been taught, and sort of know what is maybe the norm for just that particular sort of field or that particular style of racing. And again, I know these are like rocket scientists, these geniuses, so really they should be taking inspiration from, you know, more than just Formula One, and someone is likely to have come up with the idea that he came up with. But in terms of it coming from him, I can kind of understand it just because he's got more experience of a variety of types of racing and how, you know, you can gain advantages in some of the different scenarios. So that's kind of like my both sides of the argument for it, is that could have been better if it came from her, but I understand why it came from Sunny.
Did they actually use driving styles that were not Formula One? Like,
No,
did
so
Sunny
kind
actually
of
bring in like these outside styles?
no, kind of. I mean, more the mindset, I would say, because he was just quite rogue in how he was approaching things, and he was just like really bending the rules. Things like the late start, things like the collisions and clipping the wing of the car and stuff, things like the positioning and just like doing everything opposite to what everyone else was doing. It wasn't overt that he was bringing stuff in from his other racing experience. And I feel like the movie could have probably, if he was doing it, probably could have been a little bit more clearer on that. But you can kind of infer it, or that's kind of how I perceive some of the actions that he was taking.
I know zero, less than zero about racing. Like my reaction to the story, I think kind of needs to be calibrated in that way because there's a possibility that if you know this stuff, you can pick up on references or details that I just don't. And so I'm not just gonna say here and say, oh, it's all junk, nothing makes sense, whatever, because I might be missing so much. But the movie didn't really convince me that it was that smart, right? That this was actually a movie by and for like racing fans. It seemed to be a lot more like a standard Hollywood story with Formula One trappings. And that's kind of borne out by the reviews that I've seen, where not one person has said like this was made by Formula One nerds. This is deep cuts, whatever. Like it does not seem to be that kind of movie, and so I'm kind of hesitant to assume that the movie is smarter than me in this case, right? But at the same time, I also don't have kind of the knowledge to point out this is wrong or this is inauthentic or whatever. That's kind of why I'm like maybe focusing more on the character stuff because that doesn't rely on the technical stuff as much. But it's more like the technical stuff that's in this seemed kind of basic, like being the first person in history to kind of think about turbulence. Like it seems kind of basic. Or this whole thing about deliberately slow rolling the start so that you have warm tires when everybody else has been waiting for you and therefore has cold tires. Has nobody done this before? Does Formula One not have a rule about this? Because this seems like really easy to game. I don't know.
How accurate does it have to be? And this is what I was thinking when I was coming out the movie was, I know it took a lot of liberties. And again, I'm not a Formula One person, so I can't tell you where all the liberties were taken, but I definitely know things like intentionally having emergency cars come onto the track for whatever reason, or emergency like cutting things off and whatever like that. I'm sure that just doesn't happen in Formula One, but it's for a movie purpose and it's meant to make the sport more entertaining than it actually is in real life. So for me, in these types of movies, I always give them a little bit of leeway and a little bit of the ability to just like really kind of push what actually happens in these sports. It's like when you watch a boxing movie and they're just punching each other in the head non-stop for the whole round. It's like that wouldn't happen because one, you'll be completely concussed and someone will probably get knocked out, and two, it'd be extremely dangerous. And there are fights where people do slug it out and go back and forth, but not to the extent that you see in some of these boxing movies, or even like some of the football movies that you see where you kind of see the person just doing unrealistic things on a football pitch and bending it in this, that, and the other. I know all of those references are probably going over your head because I know you're not a sports person, but my point is I see it in all types of movies where, because you're telling a hero story and because it's for entertainment purposes, is that it doesn't have to follow the real convention of how the sport actually plays out. Because if we actually watched how Formula One actually played out, it'd probably be a little bit, well, for me anyways, because I'm not a fan of Formula One, it'd probably be a lot more boring. And I couldn't sit there just kind of watching them go through the standard how Formula One races go. So for me, I excuse a little bit more. And even when it comes to like plot devices and how they go about certain things, it's like the way that Joshua's character crash occurred in the movie probably wouldn't happen in real life. The whole like turbulence thing, again, like I agree with you, probably wouldn't happen in real life. Even the emergency cars having to come on. But there's just like a lot of things that happen in this where it's just plot devices as opposed to, how things will play out. And again, I can excuse the movie for it because they needed to find a way for them to be the worst team in Formula One to up there and competing. And it wasn't going to all be through, especially for like anyone that knows F1. It's like, yeah, the driver plays a part, but also it's about the car that you're driving. There's a reason why, some of these brands win all the time because it's like they have much better resources that go into the cars that they're designing. So yeah, if they want to take a little bit of liberties in an area where it doesn't cost and it's a way for them to compete with the bigger teams in F1, then it's just like, yeah, Like, have at it, go for it. I don't care as long as we get the character moments and we get the story. I'm okay with it.
I just completely reject this whole idea of, oh, just do whatever because it's just a movie. I don't think I've ever seen a movie where I said, oh, this is cool, but I wish they had taken this less seriously, or they had taken more liberties or something like that, right? I can think of a lot of movies that are made worse by people not being authentic to what it is they're portraying. I don't think I've ever seen a movie where I said, okay, this is too authentic. Like, this is no fun because it's just too authentic. And I think you can get bogged down in minutia and whatever, but I think you can still find the drama. And I think what I would have wanted from this, like, again, I'm not invested in Formula One at all, right? But I kept feeling like I'm getting the cartoon version of the sport, and I'm sure you can tell an underdog story where things happen mostly the way they do in Formula One, right? Like, maybe some things are shortened, or there's or abbreviated, or maybe you need to streamline things a bit. But I'm sure you could tell us a story where, like, the major events are broadly how it really is. And I just know this from other topics, right? Like Silicon Valley is a better show because it understands how tech startups work and how Silicon Valley works and all of that, right? That show did its homework. It's a better show, but it's ultimately a comedy. But the plot lines and the characters and the character journeys are more compelling because the writers who wrote this understood what it was they were writing about and cared about it. And you can go down the list of just about any show or movie that kind of takes a similar approach. It's almost always better. And I have a feeling like this, like, maybe if this movie was mostly authentic to Formula One, it would go over my head. But I have a feeling it would be a better story. Because even as somebody who does not know the first thing about Formula One, I smelled the bullshit. Like, I realized that this is nonsense, right? This is not how this works in, like, so many different ways. And because of that, I cared less. And because of that, I realized that the stakes were fake. And a movie is meant to make me forget about this stuff. It's meant to convince me of the illusion. If it doesn't, that's a problem. And I think that is one of the things that held back my enjoyment of the movie. And that is why ultimately I didn't care in the end, even though in the first 90 minutes or so I was really on board with the characters. But once I realized that this conflict is fake, that the stakes are fake, that the drama is fake, in the sense of not being really informed of, like, these are the actual challenges that somebody in that position might have, and we're finding the drama in that. For that reason, I was less invested and I cared less.
My question, and I know you don't need to have the answer to this, is that how do you explain how they win? Because again, Formula One is very much as much about the car as is the person that's driving the car in it. And if they have a terrible car, which they do state in the movie, is that the car isn't up to the standards of other cars and they need to remodel it, etc. If it's not up to the standards, it's how can you gain the advantages? How can you make up the difference without finding a magic pot of cash somewhere and coming up with a whole brand new car randomly in the movie? And it's just like I hear it for other stories, but here I don't know how they could make it believable that he's the reason why. And I feel like real F1 fans would be like, it's a bit of bullshit if he just kind of got in the car and the car went faster because of him, because they know that it's very much about how the car's built, how the car's designed, the engine in the car and this and the other. And again, I don't have all the details, but the reason I could look past it was you don't just magically have a faster car. You have to find the small things. You have to find like the half seconds here, there, and everywhere. And if it's a case of like he's bending the rules just enough to have warmer tires when everyone else has cold tires, or because he's created so much chaos in other races that him starting with the opposite tires to everyone else means people are a little bit wary of him, so that they're not paying attention to Joshua, who can kind of like slip in and get himself in a better position early on in the race and things like that. I can kind of like look past it. And again, if they want to create something where all the other teams haven't thought about it and their team, kind of came up with it, I can kind of look past that. I know we kind of exhausted this conversation, but this is just kind of me saying, as someone that has some type of knowledge about how the cars work and how F1 works, it's hard for me to imagine how you can tell a compelling story, or especially when you know that by the end of the movie, he has to win. Like, to complete his journey, he has to win. Is how do you bridge that gap?
See,
and you have to find ways.
Maybe the answer is it's not a story about winning the race. Maybe you can't. Maybe you just simply cannot compete with the big players who have the best cars and the best engineers. and all these advantages, maybe an underdog simply cannot win like this in Formula One. It's kind of how it feels like to me, because like there's so much money involved and it's so cutting edge in terms of its engineering or whatever. Maybe the story would have been about just about Sonny and Joshua, about how they kind of make each other better, that sort of thing. And that is obviously in the movie, right? I think if that had been the point where they say, okay, we cannot win, we can simply not lose, instead of actually winning the race, maybe they come in just enough to not be disqualified or something like that, right? Then maybe that would have been like the racing aspect of it, and maybe they need to improve enough to not be disqualified or something. I don't know how it works, but
Thank you.
I feel like it should have been like a character focused arc, and the victory would have been in on the character level, not on winning the race.
Then you're taking away our dopamine from him winning the race at the end, Daniel, man. You're taking away our rush
Yeah.
of the audience. And again, this is meant to be a crowd pleaser type of movie. So I understand in a different type of movie, it could have been that, but this is just some summer fun, man. We need them to win. We want them to win. So I would have taken away from it.
I can just imagine like a story where Sonny loses the race, but he wins the battle for Joshua's soul. You know what I mean? Something like that. I understand that maybe large parts of the audience would not have wanted that. They would have said, "Hey, why does this not? Why does my Formula One movie not end with a big race or whatever?" I don't know. I just feel like maybe I'm also alone in this, but like reviews for this are not strong, right? Like many people are saying, "Yeah, this is just a pile of flashy nonsense," and the car chases are cool, but that's kind of it. That seems to be kind of the consensus. And I feel like if they had stripped out, like we didn't even finish my list of unfinished plot lines, right? There's also the story about the corrupt investor who wants to make the team lose on purpose so that he can force a sale of the team, and that allows him to cash out. And when they win, he's kind of locked into 5 more years or whatever it is in this old contract, and he lost a whole bunch of money. That also kind of doesn't really, like, that's not the story, right? Like that is not what it's about in the end. That kind of shows up kind of in the last half hour, but it's not really, like, it's not the story of the movie. And I feel like all of these things, like, it's not like they're completely, like, they don't undermine each other. They don't sabotage each other. But because there are so many of them, none of them can really reach the end of their arc, I think. And I think that is really the big one. And I think if you cut this down, make the movie half as long, and make it just about the one thing that really matters. And like there's other arcs here that don't really go anywhere, like the whole thing about Kate and her struggles to be recognized in a man's world and all of that. Not much there, right? And we have like 3 scenes with Jodie, right? This Wikipedia calls her a tire gunner. I'm gonna assume that's the correct term. You know what I mean? Like she messes up several times, and there's like this whole thing. There's a similar dynamic there, and it also does not really go anywhere. Ultimately, what kills this movie for me is there's just so much stuff going on, and each individual piece is fine to good. But I feel like I don't want to call it a first draft again, because we kind of do that a little bit too often. But it felt like they had a whole bunch of ideas and threw them in, and then in the second revision, they should have cut half of it and realized, okay, this is the core of our story. We're going to cut everything else, and we're going to decide, okay, this is the story of Sonny imbuing Joshua with his wisdom so that he can win, or Joshua kind of learning that there's more to the sport than he thought. Like something, it should have been possible to kind of boil it down to something very simple and then do that. And everything in the movie supports that. Give us kind of the structure of the Terminator, right? Do one thing and do it really well.
This is why I disagree again, Daniel, man. I like strongly disagree. Again, because I understand the type of movie it's trying to be. It's trying to be just like a crowd pleaser and get as much people in. I feel like all of the different stories that we have in this, whilst they might not all have the satisfying conclusion, they all serve a purpose, because I feel like, a lot of the core of it is between Sonny and Joshua in this movie, and, the conflict and their dynamics between it. But when you're trying to create a crowd pleaser and you've got Brad Pitt in there, of course you're going to have the romantic interest. I feel like what the movie could have easily done is given her nothing to work with and given her absolutely, zero material, and she just be someone that just falls for him when she shouldn't. But it gives her a little bit of story, and it gives her a little bit of background and understanding as to who she is and what her character is and her determination, etc. Likewise, I know we kind of touched on sort of Sunny and Joshua, etc. But likewise with them, like, with Joshua, it's like, this person that whilst he's a hot prospect and he knows he's a talent, he's a little bit misguided, he's a little bit, ill-disciplined in what he's trying to do. But he understands that if this goes wrong, then that kind of might kill his chances of ever being in Formula One again, because it's, really cutthroat and there's like very limited seats and things like the gun driller or whatever the tie driller, whatever you call her. Like, I don't feel like it's overbearing. I feel like it's a small piece in the story. It just adds a little bit more. It, contributed to, both Sonny's arc in this and Joshua's arc as well, in terms of, how he was treating people and how he was interacting with the people around him, where like Sonny was like old school and like, cared about everyone and, was a friendly face to everyone. Even like things like the investor and stuff, all of this is contributing to the large story that we're telling, and all of this feeds into the main two characters that we have in this, which is Sunny and Joshua, and just kind of helps with the context and helps with the understanding of the characters, whilst not making. And I know everyone else is almost like a cookie cutter type of character, but you have an understanding as to their motivations and why they're doing what they're doing. So I wasn't completely mad at it. I thought for me it fit within the movie, and yeah, maybe if you narrow your focus down on one or two stories within this, you might make a better movie which is a little bit shorter than what we got in this movie.
To me, it just speaks to a lack of focus, right? Like, I feel like each of these pieces are fine, and there could have been more had there been more time for it. This doesn't even seem to be that big a crowd pleaser, right? Because reviews are not that great for this. But I will tell you who was pleased. The 9-year-old who sat next to me in the cinema, he was really into it. Like, every time they went to a new track, he kind of quietly said the name of the city, right, where this was, right? And he recognized the tracks and he recognized all the brands and whatever, and he was really into this. So I'm happy for him, but I still feel like he could have gotten a better story.
It does have 97% on Rotten Tomatoes at the moment. But what I have found is... Yeah, it's got 97% at the moment. But what I have found, especially with the people that I've spoken to, is that people are either like, yeah, the movie was fine, it was good, and it was kind of like, basic, or people were like me, where I was just so invested in, the world and the team and the characters, and I enjoyed the racing aspect of it and all of those elements, and just thought that this was just such a great cinema experience. It kind of seems like people are either really, really loved it, or just enjoyed it enough and didn't hate the movie and thought it was just fine. But I feel like I sit on, I really enjoyed it, and I feel like you're more on, it's just fine, to more maybe this could have been a lot better than what we got.
Like, ironically, this feels like a shitbox car that's made from really good pieces. They just pick the wrong pieces or something, or they have unnecessary pieces in there, and so the car is slowed down or something. That's kind of maybe the metaphor to describe this movie.
Potentially.
I'm surprised the reviews are so high, because I checked this a few days ago and I was sure it was more mixed than this. And now you're right, it's like 97% audience and like 90%, 85% critics. So everybody seems to love this except me, apparently. I just felt this, like, the story, like the character aspect of it, just underwhelming. Like, even as I was watching like Sunny ride off into the sunset, I said, what did you achieve? Like, yes, you won the race, but like, what's your character accomplishment? I don't know. Like there's pieces here. There's lots of different things it could be, and things it's kind of sort of half is, right? There's lots of half accomplishments, half conclusions, but again, nothing that quite gets to the finish line. Ironically, again, like, for a movie that's all about getting to the finish line, why doesn't this one?
What did you think about the actual racing and, the scenes where we're, on the track with the cars and we're sort of going around and they're fighting for position, etc.? Because I only discovered after I'd watched the movie that this was made by the same person that did Top Gun Maverick. And that was actually a massive sleeper for me, because I remember that movie came out and everyone was kind of talking about it, and it was like slowly making more and more money each week in the box office till the point it hit $1 billion. And I finally gave it a chance. And again, it's a similar type of movie to this, but I equally enjoyed it just as much. And I remember the flight scenes in that were just as much, satisfying and adrenaline inducing as the scenes in this particular movie, I really enjoyed some of the race scenes, all of that, and just kind of seeing them going around the track. But what was your take on that?
So as somebody who doesn't know the first thing about Formula One, I was really entertained. Like I really liked how those races were shot, and there was real tension there. There was real drama there. There was a choreography to them and a structure to them, and I liked that. I just having a good time watching this as the races were happening. So that part to me was definitely a highlight.
And good insight as well into the strength it takes to actually pilot some of these cars. They're actually piloting rockets, essentially,
Mhm.
and a lot of the training that they have to go through, a lot of like the I think it's like the G force and like the whip in the head and stuff like that, whatever the technical terms are for it. I don't particularly know, but it was just interesting because I always hear that these drivers, these race cars, are like some of the fittest people in the world and have like the best routines and this, that, and the other. And you wouldn't really think it because you're just kind of behind the car, you're sitting in the car and you're just like driving the car and the car's doing a lot of the work. But no, you actually have to deal with the impact and the force that, of the speed that you're traveling at. So it was really good insight. And actually, it made me somewhat interested in F1. Whether I will follow up that interest, probably not. But yeah, at least piqued my interest a little bit. But I can imagine the real thing won't be as entertaining as this movie.
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of respect for just the skill that goes into this. Even though if I don't find it entertaining, I can recognize that this is difficult to do. This requires you to be at the top of your game. This requires dozens and hundreds of people to all work together, and then it all comes down to like a number. And I thought that movie conveyed that idea that it's not simply about the rock star drivers, but it's actually a team effort. And there's the scene where kind of Sonny gives this pep talk where he says, if I can find zero point 0.1 seconds and you can find 0.1 seconds and engineering can find 0.1 seconds, then maybe that's enough for us to actually win this. And that really brought home the point that yes, this is a team effort. I thought that was nice.
So, last thoughts.
Ultimately, what I care about is character, right? And I felt like there were 4 different movies going on here that all were kind of unfinished because they kind of crowded each other out. I liked pretty much all of the pieces. I think the charisma of the actors really holds this together and really elevates it. That kept my interest for the first 90 to 100 minutes. But then I waited for like the big character resolution that was actually satisfying and that was actually complete, and then it would actually tell a complete story, and that part never came. And so for that reason, I walked out of it kind of underwhelmed, where I kind of was saying, okay, I don't exactly regret watching this, but I can't say it's good because, like, on a story level, it's just missing pieces. And so for that reason, my final rating is Formula One out of Formula 3.
Fair enough. For me, I completely loved it. I had such a blast with this. I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed the character dynamics. I enjoyed all the conflicts that were in this. I thought the racing was intense and brilliant. Very, very inducing as well with, how fast they're going and how close they're driving to each other for sure. Really, really got the blood pumping in the cinema. I just thought it was like a great spectacle, a great summer movie to kick off July, and hopefully many more, good movies to come with what we've got lined up for in July. I had such a blast with this in the cinema, so I would give this a 9.5 out of 10. That might be my highest rated movie of the year. I don't know if I gave what I gave Sinners. That might be my highest rated movie of the year. It's not my favorite movie of the year, but for what it is and judging it for, what it wanted to do and what it delivered for me and my experience of it, 9.5 out of 10. And with that, I guess we reached the end of the episode. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for rocking with us and tuning into this week's episode. Of course, if you liked everything you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion / debate, actually, because we had different opinions on this movie. But if you liked our discussion / debate on this, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast. See you later.
Bye bye.